mention the word cheddar, and you naturally think of cheese. But forget the cheese, and this is what you get. For thousands of people, Mendip is Cheddar Gorge. And whilst this isn't exactly my cup of tea, there's an element of fun. There's no point in being the serious walker down here, so you may as well sit back and relax. After all, the entertainment is all laid on.
We're going to voyage up a prehistoric riverbed because that's what this road is. Now we're on that prehistoric riverbed, ladies and gentlemen. If you look on your left, you'll see Forks Restaurant coming up. That was an old watermill at one time. The river below it is a Cheddar Yo, and that's the one that helped create the gorge and the show caves. Up on the right-hand side, you have Jacob's Ladder. That leads up to Pavey's Lookout Tower, and then the best bit, what you came for, the 3-mile clifftop walk.
The Mendip Hills are the most southerly outcrop of Carboniferous limestone in England, and it is the nature of the rock that gives these hills a unique character. Where there are valleys, you would expect to find rivers, but limestone is porous, and the rivers are hidden from view, disappearing down holes on the plateau and later emerging at the foot of the hill. Out in the open, a sense of stone is everywhere. It breaks the surface and is built into walls, grey colouring the cottage, barn and farmhouse. Quarries and abandoned mines pockmark the land, and although the Mendip soil is thin and its countryside windblown, it's good for sheep.
And finally, try our adventure caving. You can go underground with an experienced caver. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Spooky.
Once underground, the water plays havoc with the limestone, etching the rock into huge caverns. Stalactites spill down from the roofs like ancient candle wax, and a fairy tale world is waiting to be discovered.
Wow. Well, this is spectacular. Look at this. I presume this sort of scallop effect is where the water is bubbled up and dissolved the roof of the cavern. So you get these, where these little splashes have gone, you get these little scallop shapes on the roof. Beautiful.
In this series, I shall be exploring the unknown Mendips and revealing some of the secrets that these hills hold. Today, I'm walking Cheddar Gorge. Most people see it from either the bus or the car, which is a pity, because there's another way of exploring Mendip's most famous landmark. The gorge begins high up on the limestone plateau, and on top, tourism is the last thing on people's minds. Here life follows the yearly cycle of farming, and spring is a very busy time of year. My walk begins at Charterhouse, and Farmer John Small introduces me to his flock.
Used to me, are they? So I better hold back a little bit.
She looks a good mother, she'll be all right.
So you're a great believer, John, in lambing outdoors, then?
Oh, yeah.
Because not everybody does that, do they?
I think it's healthier and you don't get build-up of infection. And much easier shepherding. I mean, you know, I won't handle her again now, I hope. 80% of the lambs that are born, we don't actually handle or touch, because they're just one on their own. It's not their instinct to be indoors, really.
These little pot marks in the fields, which are full up with stones, what are they?
That's where the stone was quarried to build the dry stone walls. There's a ton of stone in every yard, and they've only been using horse and carts, so obviously they quarry it as near as possible. And also there was lime burning as well, which was sort of very localised. They just built a small lime kiln, and that was used entirely for the fuel fields in the surrounding area.
That confuses me, because why on earth do you need to put lime on your fields when this is limestone country?
yeah, everyone says like this. Limestone is very free draining, and we've got a high rainfall here, and it goes straight down through. Actually leaches the lime out of the soil, so you're continuously putting it back. You've got all the limestone you want. You know, Mendip soil is very acidic, purely because of that leaching.
Well, I'm going to try and get this definitive portrait of you, so
I see.
I know you don't like handling them, but if you could pick those two up again.
Yep, no
I'll
problem.
walk over there.
Right. Okay, missus.
I like taking photographs as the action unfolds, but sometimes a subject needs a little coaxing. I'm trying to portray John within his working landscape.
Come on in.
Good job they don't attack, isn't it, really?
Sorry?
It's a good job they don't attack. You see them stamping their feet sometimes. Come on. Upsetting her a bit, is it?
She won't recognise them when they're up in the air. Oh.
That's lovely. Look at me now.
I'm starting the walk at the head of the valley, an area once heavily mined for lead. Hidden from view, and miles away from the chaos in the gorge, there is another world waiting to be discovered. Doug Woods is a man with a deep love of nature, and amongst the old lead workings, he offers to show me one or two Mendip surprises.
So what have we got there then,
Well,
Danny?
it's a lovely grass snake, beautiful. A long, thin snake with a tapering tail. And it's got quite a distinct yellow band at the back of the head. And behind that, there's a black band. It's got round pupils to its eyes. And of course, they can't blink. It's got its tongue out, as you can see. And the tongue is forked, and it's got a little aperture at the top of the head where the tongue can go in and out. So it doesn't happen to open its mouth exactly. It
I can see it,
put its tongue out, you see. And just at the top here, there are two little organs called Jacobson's organs. Now, the idea of the tongue coming out is a wet tongue, like a dog's nose, to pick up particles of scent. And they wave their tongue about and pick these particles up, take it in, and tuck it up to the top of the mouth, and that's where they relay it to the sense organs.
So Doug, describe the habitat. What do they need, grass snake?
Here you've got nice clumpy grass, because this was a mining area and it was lead mining, and so no grazing is done here because it's got lead content. So you've got lovely clumpy grass which is excellent for hiding.
So how do they stalk their prey then?
Well, grass snakes tend to actually hunt prey. You can see them moving through the grass, their heads just up very slowly, and they're looking for frogs and toads. And here we have a lake which attracts your amphibians. So as they come out of the water, you've got the snakes sort of waiting for them almost.
Is it easy to hold one?
This one's quite quiet.
Right.
Try it.
So you just literally just use it?
Yeah, I'm not even holding it now, not grasping it. It's a nice quiet snake. So, unless you know snakes and can handle snakes, I don't recommend picking them up. Sometimes they feign dead and they'll go all limp. And you think, oh, this thing has died. And you put it on the ground and it'll curl up with its mouth wide open and you think it's dead. And you just relax for a minute and all of a sudden it shoots away.
So we better let this one.
Yes, we'll let this one go.
Then.
It's been very, very nice and very easy. And of course, it's a little bit cool this morning, so he's quiet.
Well, there he goes. Shall we go and see if we can find an adder?
An adder, yes.
Looking as though we've lost a wallet, Doug and I search the field, though I'm secretly praying he will find the adder first.
Adder down there. It's a female. The females are brown. Very pronounced zigzag line.
Very distinctive.
It is, isn't it? Right down the body. and in the male it's black.
Black.
You can walk by and they'll very often sit and not move if they think they haven't been seen. But if they think they've been seen, then they'll go. These are settling pits, or settling lakes, if you like. There's a whole series of them. They start up in the top of the valley, and then you get a wall, which causes the water just to flow over and leave a very shallow lake, which is quiet. And the lead that's in the water from the washing of the ore at the back, further up from the mining area, falls to the bottom, and the pure water flows over into the next settling pit, and gradually it clears it, and it all starts again until at the bottom you've got virtually lead-free water.
So that was the idea. It wasn't to extract more lead.
No,
it was
no.
to purify the water down below at the bottom
That's
of the
right.
gorge.
This is the last one, and sheep and cattle actually are grazed from now on.
Before we drop into the woods, we search for one more reptile, a reptile that is probably the most persecuted in the British Isles today, but with the least exciting name, the slow worm. So this is the one that I see so often with its head chopped off. You know, that gardeners have a go at it because they're terrified of them, or quite often you see birds of prey have had a go at them, haven't you?
Oh yes, they're taken by.
But it isn't really a snake.
No, but it's a legless lizard. It's gradually lost its limbs, and if you dissect them out, you'll find that there is a pelvic girdle there which is missing in snakes. These have got eyelids that the snake hasn't got.
Yeah. I mean, the face really does look like a lizard's.
Yes, it's much
face,
more.
doesn't it? Yeah.
It's much more like a lizard. This is just about full grown. They live to a terrific age.
I'd read that.
You know, 34 years. One of their main food items is slugs. They come out at night and they hunt at night, unlike our lizards, the common lizard, which is purely a daytime animal. And it basks for a few minutes, and then it hunts for a few minutes, and then it has to bask again to warm up. And it daren't get too hot. If you go along a wall on a hot day, you won't see them. They're what we call estivating. They're resting in the shade.
Right.
They have a forked tongue, but it's much blunter than a snake's.
So, Doug, why is the gorge so important for wildlife?
Mainly because perhaps the sides are so steep that it hasn't been used for farming. And so your natural plants, which follows your natural trees and animals, are still there. They haven't been disturbed. There was some coppicing here. And woodland management, of course, is important to a certain degree, but it's not the same as farming.
So what can we see further down then?
Oh, down here I've got dormouse boxes, and hopefully we ought to find some dormice in them.
This is mostly hazel coppice then, Doug?
Yes, this is old hazel coppice. It used to be used, of course, for the quarry, but now it's gone into disuse. And we do take a little bit out just to keep it going, especially for dormice, actually. Now, we looked at several boxes, and there's this other one here as we climb up the hill. Just see what we've got in there. Yes, we are. Look at that. Aren't they absolutely wonderful? I think they're the prettiest little mammal that we've got.
That's perfect.
Isn't it?
Beatrix Potter,
Yeah.
isn't it? Look at that.
Lovely whiskers and little white bibs. Only a little bit of nest material in, because they don't need nest material because they don't need to keep warm, you see. These are the common dormouse.
So why are they so rare now?
We've lost so much deciduous woodland, and we've certainly lost 143,000 miles of hedgerow since the war. And the hedgerows are their means of getting from one wood to another. They're definitely retreating quite fast. They're found in the south of England, and they peter out in Devon and Cornwall.
Near to the town of Cheddar, the woodland gives way to field, with evidence of terracing on the steep sides of the gorge. The resident cattle now graze upon rough pasture, but at one time these fields told a different story. The crop that used to be grown in abundance here is only just hanging on, a victim of foreign competition and intensive farming practice. As I round the next corner, one remaining strawberry field is busy with the harvest, and the air is filled with bustle and chatter.
Do you just choose the ones that are nice and ripe, or are there certain rules about what you can pick and what you can't?
These are getting a bit small now because they've been picked about 3 or 4 times, so we're trying to pick the better ones off, and then you leave the others for people picking in.
And how long is the season then?
I think we've been picking for 3 weeks, but a lot depends on the weather and what the market is like and how much fruit there is, really.
So what variety are these then?
C1s, I don't know whether they're called anything else, but...
C1s?
Yes.
That's a bit of a boring name. Not very romantic, are they?
No.
Doesn't matter though, they taste wonderful.
So do you just pull, or...?
It's quite important when you're picking. You move the leaves back, you see the fruit, and you snap an
so
inch
you
down
keep
from
the...
stem. You must keep this because it rots very quickly when
Without
transport.
I didn't know that.
On every patch of ground, everybody grew strawberries. Everybody used to go down with their wheelbarrows almost loaded with strawberries down to the station. There are only 2 people left in Cheddar who are growing them. At Draycott, I think they're mostly grown on polythene now and in polythene tunnels.
We can get in together. Just somewhere here.
Do you want to be in this, Laura, or are you going to be anonymous?
Come on,
This
Laura.
is 2nd generation. This is my daughter.
Oh,
you see.
right.
She's got a day
Come
off
on, then.
work.
Look at me, everybody. Look at me.
Cheers.
Wonderful. That's lovely.
Okay, happy
Thank you very much.
I'm now down in the bottom of the gorge, and already I'm missing the peace and quiet. In Cheddar's long history, tourism is a very recent addition. The discovery and opening of the caves in the 19th century has grown into a gift shop paradise, with endless tea rooms. It's all rather jolly, but up above, there is a different world altogether.
The only way out of here is to go up, and you need a good pair of lungs.
High up on top, Kate Lawrence of the Somerset Wildlife Trust guides me to the edge. This is a no man's land of tenacious plant life, and Mendip's most famous flower, the exquisite Cheddar Pink.
Why is it so rare?
In the past, it's been collected by people. There was a lot more of this flower here on the gorge going back a few years, but people have been collecting it, not picking the flower so much, but collecting it for their gardens. As you can see, it's make quite a nice rockery plant. Also, one of the problems for the Cheddar Pink is it doesn't compete well with other plants. That's why it's clinging to the edge. The minute you get a stronger community of plants coming in, the Cheddar Pink dies out.
Disappears.
And the rock stone crop, another rarity, speciality here in the gorge, just growing out from the limestone here.
It's like a triffid.
Yes, we have a huge cluster of yellow flowers on the end in another few days' time. It likes the dry conditions of the limestone. The calcareous plants living just off the edge of the rock rose, the thyme, they thrive on the neutral soils here. Again, very poor base soils. And these rarities on the edges here, it's really the limestone outcrops with next to no soil at all, just the little crevices with where the water comes down through. And as you can see, virtually no soil. They're just hanging on.
And how do they do for moisture? Because this rock eats moisture, doesn't it?
It does. It's very porous, but up on the top of Mendip here, we do get our fair share of rainfall, and they do get a good soaking from time to time. That's all they need.
It's wonderful to think that all that tourism is contained down there, isn't it? And it's wonderfully isolated up here.
That's right. Two sides of the Cheddar Gorge, aren't there? There's the Cheddar Village and the Cheddar Show Caves, which attract all the tourists in. The vast majority don't get up here onto these cliffs.
You don't think one day they'll have a chairlift up here?
It's been rumoured in the past.
Has it?
It has.
So Cheddar Gorge is a wonderful natural feature, but its habitat has changed, hasn't it, over the years? It's not always looked like this.
What you see now from here is a lot of secondary woodland, which has really come in since the Second World War. It's become quite dense now, and so there is now an active management programme to open up the sides of the gorge again. If you look sort of further up, you can see where the National Trust have been clearing a lot of the land of scrub on the sides.
It's noticeably warmer here, isn't it, as we've gone further down the gorge?
That's right, we've dropped down a bit, much warmer here. The plants are a little more advanced than they were higher up. Onto the calcareous grassland community here, with the yellow rock rose
That's
here.
beautiful, isn't
It
it?
is lovely. Quite a nice show of that here, where it's nice and sheltered. This plant next to it, not in flower yet, this is marjoram. If you rub the leaves, very strong herb smell, very nice. Okay, we've also got, lurking in the grass here, little gerania. A lot of oxeye daisy here on the edge where the soils are a little bit more disturbed. But a riot of colour.
Beautiful,
Absolutely
isn't it?
fantastic. Yeah.
Fantastic backdrop, isn't it? Wonderful.
It is.
It's like, in fact, it's classic. What I'm going to do, I'm going to take your photograph. Just go sit on that rock there.
Right.
I know it looks a bit unsafe. It's very traditional, this, you see. It's the husband photographs wife right on the edge, you know, and then says, back a bit, dear.
That's right. Most people tend to do it from the safety of the car park with the backdrop of the cliff behind.
That's good. That's great. The walk follows the line of the gorge back onto the plateau and ends where I started at Warren Farm. But for John Small, the farming year goes on. It's now midsummer, and John and his team are well into shearing. Another busy day on the sheep calendar.
Yeah, only once a year, thankfully.
How many have you got to do?
It's 2,300 shear.
That many? Well,
Yeah. They've done about 1,000 now. They've been going 2 days. So
so they're going some then?
they're going well, pretty well.
This is East Mendip, and it's a landscape that has scarred, then healed and scarred again. But it is well worth exploring. for the countryside is full of interest.
I'm sitting on a packhorse bridge that crosses the bed of a canal that was never finished. Everywhere you go, there are clues to an industrial past. This packhorse bridge was built so that the ponies could carry coal from the pits down the valley to Frome and beyond. And the canal was a speculative venture to try and improve communications in what was then very difficult terrain.
The walk follows the Nettlebridge Valley into a cradle of industrialisation and the hidden remains of an old paper mill, its age and history now lost in time.
To make paper, you needed two things, a quick stream and the purest of water. And you've got that here. Literally just a few yards downstream from where the water pours out of the hillside, there's a giant holding pond. You can just make out the wall of it here. And then there is a sluice, and very cleverly they've diverted the stream, the spring, right down into a little culvert there. And if you look over here, we're quite high up. We can make out the four walls of the old paper mill.
Winter and early spring is a good time to do a walk like this, for the vegetation is low and the archaeology much easier to see.
Walking down this wooded track, there's a rather sad and strange atmosphere, because believe it or not, this wasn't just the track, but was the main thoroughfare through what was once a village of some 20 houses.
The village was called Fern Hill, and although its history eludes us, it is likely that this is where the labourers at the mill once lived. The walk carries on down the valley to the village of Coleford, an old mining settlement. Julie Dexter is a local historian.
Yes, what we've got here is a superb view of the whole of the village.
So Julie, how did you get started on all this work?
Well, I'm interested in Methodism, and to understand Methodism in the coalfield, you really need to understand the miners. So I got interested in the miners. For many of the miners, Methodism takes up a lot of their non-working lives. You pass the chapel on the way to work, you come home, you get clean, you might go to a Bible class. On Sundays there are services, morning, afternoon, evening, Sunday schools. It dominates their social life.
Julie, it's a wonderful view of Coleford from up here, so just describe to me what we can see.
Down in the bottom of the village you've got the old houses all built higgledy-piggledy. And as the coal mining moved from the far end of the valley down to this end of the valley with the opening of Newbury Mackintosh pit, so they started to build at the top, and you can see some of the older houses, and you can see all the new houses as well.
It's usually the church that dominates the houses, but that's not the case here, is it?
No, it's not. The Wesley Chapel stands out very clearly. It shows very well how much more important Methodism was to the religious history of this village than the Church of England for so long. There's been a chapel on the site for 250 years, and the church wasn't put up until 1831. The chapel is closer to the heart of the village and therefore the heart of the people.
It has this air about it, doesn't it, of a mining community. It's all tucked in together and on a very steep slope.
In the 1790s, one of the big problems with Coleford is getting anything out. They hit on the bright idea of a canal to link the top end of the Nettlebridge Valley right the way through to Frome to join the main line of the Dorset and Somerset Canal.
So what do you call this?
We call it the Hucky Duck.
The Hucky Duck.
The Hucky Duck.
Is that a corruption of aqueduct then?
One assumes so, yes.
It must have cost an enormous amount of money.
Yes, it did. It didn't do them a lot of favours. It is big by anybody's standards for an aqueduct. And right on the top originally it had a stone balustrade, which has been stolen away by people who were owed money when the canal went bankrupt, I believe.
So this was really improving communications
oh, yes,
in a big way.
Yes, it was a major investment, and if they'd finished it, it would have been wonderful. They'd have probably opened a lot more coal mines than they did. So,
But it was never finished.
yeah, they ran out of money.
It's not the most obvious thing to do, photographing it from the other side, but I rather like the light coming through the tunnels. It presents incredible problems with the sun coming into the lens, but anyway, that's lovely.
This is taken in 1893, and in 1893, the larger part of the coalfields in Britain, the miners were locked out. They were trying to resist a pay cut. And we're talking about best part of 200 men employed in the pits in Colford, locked out for the better part of 8 months. So for the vast majority of people, it was a time of great hardship. The miners' union effectively ran out of subscription money to pay them even the minimum of strike pay, and they resorted to carting this wagon. They've got the band on the wagon.
I was going to say there's even a harp there
Yes.
on the wagon.
And so all the people with their instruments were entertaining as they went. You can see, it's on long, long ropes, and they towed it behind them all around the area, down across the levels. And what they were looking for was relief in kind: potatoes, apples, clothing, boots, you name it, they were after it.
Wonderful photograph, wonderful photograph.
Photographs are an invaluable source of information for the historian, but this picture sparked off a lifetime of interest for Paul Barnard.
I happened to be in my auntie's one day, and she had this box of photographs. I pulled this one out, and I said, "Who's that man with the black face?" And she says, "Oh, that's your grandfather." She said, "Well, he'd just come home from the pit, and the local photographer had come to take photographs of the family because of the new baby. And they persuaded him to actually stand in the photograph. So it is quite a rare photograph."
The Somerset Mines rescue car.
This was the first mines rescue car, the at least motorised one. The grandfather on the extreme right. And they're all holding air helmets, which had a long pipe to a foot-operated bellows. At this colliery in 1908, there was a coal dust explosion.
Was anybody killed?
There were actually 10 killed, some young boys. This is the rescue scene the morning after the explosion. All the families waiting for news.
Everybody just stood around looking helpless. Well, this is unusual, Paul. It's like a souvenir. It's a souvenir of the disaster.
There was a famous publishers in Barnsley, and if there was a disaster or anything like that anywhere in the country, they'd send an agent down, and he would have the task of going round to all the relatives and trying to collect
Photographs.
portraits of the actual miners that were killed. And within 2 days, a card would be produced and sold all over the country.
Good heavens.
Before television.
Oh, that's extraordinary, isn't it? That is quite an early photograph, isn't it?
It's 1890. All the young lads in the front, they would be 12, 13, 14 years old.
And what is it? What's this hanging from their necks then, this pouch?
That would be their food stuffed in their shirts. They're wearing the Gus and Crook
Around their waist then.
around their waists.
That's very much the stuff of local history, isn't
That's
it?
right.
Gathering all this material in before it's all lost. All the people that were involved with it have gone on.
Correct.
And again. Okay, that's great. Just bring it down a little bit so I can see your face. That's great. That's lovely.
I was using this Gus and Crook when I was 16-year-old at Mel's Colliery.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
This goes round your waist, and the chain goes through the legs. The hook, it hits onto a box. You had to pull that along, fill it with coal, and pull it back.
It must have hurt that, surely.
Well, it did, yes.
I've heard some of the old miners say that at night they'd put their hand in the pot of rhino under the bed, and they'd rub that in the sores around their waist to harden up their skin.
They rub urine in.
Yeah.
Were there any rules to say the maximum weight that you could
No rules. They just fill it up. Might put some lumps around, make it a bit higher. It could be anything up to 300 weight in there.
When the coalfield was nationalised, which I believe was what, 1947?
47. April the 1st.
How did things improve? Did things change?
Definitely, somewhat, yes. There's no ponies underground then. They took them out, which I agreed with. I think the working conditions were a little better. They brought in pit baths.
So where did you have to have your bath before?
We used to have to come home and wash in a bathtub.
When I started in the mines, where some of the old miners used to chew twist backy, which were tobacco rolled in hard like a stick of licorice. And they would go round then all day, spitting over everywhere. And then when you were getting about underground, you would put your hand in it. Right, Fred?
Yes, right. I used to chew it.
You chewed it, Fred?
Yes.
Well, it hasn't done Fred any harm, has it?
No,
not at 88.
I get the feeling there was this great sense of community, and obviously in the villages where you all lived.
Well, this was more or less the centre down here, down in Colford.
But do you still think is there still a good community here then in Colford?
Well, no, they've nearly all passed on.
Everybody helped in the event of losses, family losses and one thing or another. Everybody chipped in and helped.
So a real sense of
this was community. A sense of community is the word.
Why was there this comradeship then?
Well, because there's always an element of chance of injury.
That's right, yeah.
And they was all ready to come along and assist you if you get hurt. And when I met with a serious accident at Norton Hale Colliery, they were round me like a bunch of bees. I was just brushing the bottom down, that's the bottom, and making a mark for the port. And down come this big stone. It dropped straight on me back, and one dropped on me arm. Nearly cut that arm off.
It didn't put you off going?
No, I went back down again after I was well.
Did you think the whole roof was coming in at the time?
Well, it just make you think of it a little bit. Yes, I'll agree. But you just accept it.
For the miners, those days have gone, but the clues to the past are still here. This hill, now covered in trees, was once the coal pit batch, where waste material was piled high. And here, a row of ovens, where coal was heated to produce the coke so favoured by industry. Further down the valley, in the village of Mells, there is evidence of another activity that was once an important part of the Mendip scene. Michael McGarvey is an archivist with a keen interest in the village. This was a mill, Michael?
Yes, this was the Bilbao mill, which we think was one of the 10 medieval fulling mills in Mells and Colford, which we know existed in 1515. And later became the village grist mill.
The corn mill.
That's right. And it was the Mells mill right up until the time of the First World War, so it had quite a long innings. And then it was abandoned, and you can see how quickly it's deteriorated.
The name Bilbao, that's an unusual name. That's northern Spain, isn't it?
My theory is that it's actually an Old English name, but it comes from Bil, which is a sword shape, and refers to the field above, which is also called Bilbao, runs right along the ridge. And of course, bow is a curve, so you get a double meaning of this curved field running along the top.
There's another theory then, because I'd read that in Elizabethan times they were exporting cloth, bundles of cloth from places like Shepton Mallet to San Sebastian and Bilbao.
Oh, yes.
So could there be a reference there?
Well, it's certainly possible. And I mean, Spanish wool also was very popular over here, the merino wool, and that was imported too.
So two theories.
Yes, yes, possibly.
So this is where the Leap joins the river then, Michael.
That's right, yes.
Rather a fine bridge.
Yes, it's a beautiful bridge, isn't it? Behind us here we have Kent's Hill, a rather interesting link with the medieval wool trade in Mells, because it's where the wool was stretched and laid out to dry. You see it's south-facing, and it was attached to the frames by great hooks called tenterhooks.
Oh, hence the phrase then, on tenterhooks.
Yes, exactly.
Huh.
And so I rather like that continuity, don't you?
Yes, yeah.
In local life.
It's a lovely mixture, isn't it, architecturally, this village?
Yes, absolutely, and the stone is so mellow, isn't it? But this is really the clue to it all here. We have the initials of John Selwood, the Abbot of Glastonbury, who had a particular love for Mells and decided to recreate the village in the form of an Anthony cross. And we're really in the heart of his creation here. The High Street was the foot of the cross, which was T-shaped.
This is
and
beautiful.
This was the stem. Well, it is I suppose, the second oldest planned street in Somerset after the Vicar's Close in Wells.
Charming street, isn't it? Look at this, with all the
Well, that we
blocked-up
think
windows.
is actually pre-Selwood. It's before 1492 when the street was completed.
What a magnificent tower.
Yes, this is, I always think, one of the finest perpendicular towers in Somerset.
And I suppose built on the proceeds of wool.
Oh, absolutely. The proceeds of a prosperous manor on which there were many thousands of sheep and many fulling mills. This conjunction of the church and manor house is one of the most perfect you'll ever find. And of course, they were always linked because, of course, the abbots of Glastonbury were patrons of the church. And after the dissolution of the monasteries in 1543, Thomas and John Horner bought the manor and also became patrons of the church. And the archway behind us links the two, as they have been linked really from that day to this, because the Earl of Oxford and Asquith, who now lives in the house, is a Horner on his mother's side. So you get this direct link with Mells' past.
Right back to the dissolution.
Yes, 400 years ago.
One of the things I've noticed, Lord Oxford, walking down this valley, is that when you come through somewhere like Colford, and they still have this ring about them of the industrial past, and then suddenly you walk into this little village, which is, a delightful oasis.
Right, we'd like to keep it so.
But why do you think that's so?
Partly, I think, because it's been in one family. A family who was proud of it, wanted to retain its rural character, and were more interested in doing that than in industrial development.
So what I want to do, this is my idea, I don't know if it'll work, it's actually to take you in, just literally there, in the gateway. I think that's charming. So
With
let's
the gate
try
open.
that. That's fine, just there. That's lovely. This is another example of the Industrial Revolution exploding within the countryside. Tucked away in a valley below Mells are the ruins of the Fussell's ironworks. And they made edge tools. That is, anything that required a sharp edge. Bill hooks, sickles, scythes. And you may ask, why here? As we've already seen, they had plenty of fuel. We're right on the edge of the Somerset coalfield, but the most important thing is they had water to drive the machinery. When the Fussells leased this site in 1744 from the Horner family in Mells, it must have been a very small enterprise. But by the end of the 19th century, this business had grown on a grand scale.
And so had the family. No longer the humble workers down in the woods, the Fussells had climbed the social ladder, causing rumbles of jealousy from the Horners and a refusal to renew the lease. But Thomas Fussell held the ace card. He owned a field overlooking the Horner Manor, and it was politely suggested that if the lease wasn't renewed, he would have to move the business. Colonel Horner, realizing what it would be like to live next door to a foundry, gave in and sold him the site in the woods.
This is an amazing place. 56 men worked in this valley, and just imagine the noise here. These blast furnaces would be roaring away and the tilt hammers banging on the metal, but all that's gone. All we have now is the sound of the birds and the flow of the river. Here is what they were making on this site. This is a Fussell's bill hook, and it's a tool of fantastic quality. But in 1895, this business closed down. Some say it was the agricultural recession of the time, but others think it was a lack of investment, and like the wool industry, the emphasis shifted to the north. Whatever the reason, the Fussell's name is still remembered and revered. This valley has told us a lot about the industrial past here on Mendip and its effect on landscape. We've seen how it's been used and abandoned many times and exploited for its wealth, with wool, iron and most profoundly coal. But all that is in the past. The industries have gone and nature has made a pretty good job of recolonising the valley. But just over the brow of the hill there is a completely different world. This is exploitation of Mendip today. It's quarrying, and it's big and controversial, and the subject of my next walk. From the ground, East Mendip landscape appears calm and at ease, though your ear is often bent by a persistent rumble. From the air, it is a different story. The quarrying industry is one of the largest economic activities in Somerset, scooping out these hills on a scale that is beyond belief. But we must remember, there is nothing new in all this. The remains of an Iron Age hand quarry and its associated camp in a field above Downhead represent the same industry.
Man has been exploiting these hills for thousands of years. But it's the scale of the modern industry that's so hard to come to terms with. This area is constantly under pressure. This tranquil lane here at Bull's Green at the start of my walk is a case in point. It may soon disappear under the bulldozer. The planners say they need a new road to cope with heavy traffic from a nearby quarry, but the critics say this will open up the Mendip Hills and completely destroy this valley. To some people, East Mendip has become the sacrificial lamb to industry, and in landscape terms is deemed insignificant. But I want to show you that it does have things that are worth preserving. The walk takes us into Asham Wood, an ancient woodland and a Grade 1 site of special scientific interest. Asham Wood is the last surviving remnant of primary woodland, a descendant of the wildwood that once covered the Mendip Hills. So describe to me what we're seeing here, Eunice, because in fact I'm not used to seeing a woodland on limestone.
This is an ancient woodland that's been here ever since since it warmed up at the Ice Age. It's never been ploughed up and replanted, but it's been managed, and so it's got all the old plant species in it that you can see, and they will have their attached insects and their mini beasts living under the ground and their soil bacteria and everything. And once gone, you can never, ever, ever put them back again.
Eunice Overend is a botanist and has been studying this woodland for many years.
It would have been about 3 feet high by now when it had been cut back. This is ground ivy. It's the one that's related to Chapman in the garden and has quite a nice smell.
That's lovely, isn't it?
Yeah, that's an early purple orchid. They like it in woods, and that's grown up beautifully, hasn't it?
It has. Perfect specimen, isn't it, that?
If you pick them, which of course one mustn't nowadays, and have them indoors as beautiful flowers, you don't like them for long because they smell of tomcats.
Do they? Right.
These are violets. These are wood violets. It's useful to have violets in the woods because the fritillary butterflies, the caterpillars eat them, so that's a useful part of the ecosystem.
The more you look, the more you see. I mean, it's very rich, isn't it?
It is.
And this is like a weed I get in my potato patch, Eunice. Is this a spurge?
Yes, it's wood spurge. This is a woodland marker again. It only grows in ancient woodlands because it doesn't spread very well. There's several patches where... Oh,
look at that. Isn't that wonderful, isn't it?
This kind of wood is where they begin, but you get them anywhere because they spread into anywhere suitable as primroses.
That's showing, really, that a form of woodland management is actually very good for the woodland floor.
For biodiversity, yes, if you don't have any disturbance at all, woods just get thicker and older and would finish up as here to be a mixture of oak and ash, very dark underneath.
There aren't many areas like this left, are there?
No, there are very few, and this is why it's such a pity that it is designated to be quarried, although I hope it won't be, and we all hope it won't be, but it had one of these infamous IDOs on it at the end of the war, interim development orders, which you have to pay vast amounts in compensation if you prevent the quarrying. So half of it has been removed, but the other half is still here, thank goodness.
That's okay. It's always the problem with
yes,
dogs.
I can never get them to look, yes, I can never get them to look at myself. Either they come or they look the other way.
You're winking at me. On its southwestern edge, Asham Wood abuts Tor Quarry, one of the largest quarries in Europe. quarrying of limestone is big business, and with a decline in agricultural employment, it plays a major role in the Mendip economy. The owner of Tor Quarry is Angela Yeoman. Angela, it's a stunning view. Rather an odd thing to say, but it is a stunning, exciting view. But it's a very deep hole. Why do we need so much limestone?
There is a national need for limestone. If you think of the geology of the country, the next hard stone would be Yorkshire.
And what do we use it for?
Any form of construction. Incidentally, it's used in toothpaste and light bulbs, chewing gum, I believe, and all sorts of uses. We don't make the need, I suppose civilization does. My husband died about 10 years ago, and the quarrymen wanted to have a fitting memorial, and they suggested to me that it would be good to have a standing stone. He was quite a remarkable man with tremendous foresight. He certainly had the foresight to put the railway in here, and had a lot of plans. So that's really how the stone came about, the big stone.
It's like a Bronze Age standing stone, isn't it?
That's right.
I'm going to move you around, and could I get you to stand next to it?
Good piece of stone.
When this quarry is worked out, you're going to be left with this huge hole. So what is its future?
Well, you'll be left with a large lake, farmland and wood. The limestone holds the water, and there's a need for always a water resource.
And the quarry has gone right down into the water table?
The quarry has gone into the water table, yes.
Has it upset the water table here?
It hasn't. We monitor with boreholes right the way around the quarry, and we keep putting water back into the streams locally. And incidentally, some of those streams would have already dried up on this very dry weather.
So tell me about the conservation measures, because this is a very sort of controversial industry, isn't it?
Yes, it is. This hedge that we're putting in here is to protect the quarry from a footpath that we hope to have. I'd like to make it a bridleway as well, because I think that would be ideal for the area. And it will eventually go right the way around the quarry. But of course that will take time. And there's lots of different things planted, as in the hedge over there. And we're just growing things that will grow on the top of the Mendips.
How far can you go with this quarry? Because I mean, there's a village there, isn't there? The village of Downhead.
That's right. Well, we're absolutely on the limit now. You can see that we've started to reseed over the first two faces here. So eventually it will become something to be looked at and something to be proud of in the future.
There are a lot of these quarries. Yours isn't the only one.
Mm-hmm.
Some people think they're all going to link up, and that's quite a frightening prospect.
I don't believe it will ever link up.
And how long before, dare I say it, the quarry closes?
Well, it probably will be 30 years, I should think. That's what I hope, anyhow.
Describe to me what it's like living literally next door to what must be one of the biggest quarries in Europe.
Difficult. You wake up to quarry noises in the morning at 5:15, and you're still listening to quarry noises when you go to bed. And then the trains start loading, and the trains load all night long. On top of the noise, we have the dust. We also have the problems with the blasting and damage to our properties. And the most concerning thing is the effect of the aquifer and the water levels.
Fran Britton and her husband farm in the village of Downhead, right next door to the quarry. In her spare time, she's a voluntary warden in Asham Wood.
We've already lost our water on the farm, and we've had to re-dig for a borehole. It depicts, in a way, the fact that you cannot totally trust what they're doing, and you have to watch them all the time. One day I was walking here and discovered the trees down and the topsoil removed, and hadn't remembered an application being applied for to quarry it. Unfortunately, the previous owners started quarrying an area that hadn't permission. We formed a group called the Asham and East Mendip group, and we managed to stop it.
Some would argue it has recolonised.
But how many different species of trees do you see?
Not very many, really. I suppose silver birch.
Yes, and a little bit of buddleia. And in fact, that isn't indigenous to an ancient woodland, let alone the Mendip Hills.
We do need limestone. You can't deny that. We need limestone.
Yes, I agree.
So where are we going to quarry?
Well, we can continue to quarry here, but surely we need to actually remember that this is a very valuable commodity. And at the moment, the problem is the stone is far too cheap, and it is much cheaper than the cost of recycling. In other countries, they have gone to great lengths to recycle.
I read somewhere that if we weren't careful in the future, we could have a canyon on East Mendip that was 5 miles long. Do you think that's possible?
I think it is very possible. There's 4 mega quarries on the East Mendips, and it's always been known to be the sacrificial area. Tor Works has expanded and expanded, and for the future has plans to expand yet again. And all the time, they're taking away our children's inheritance. And I feel very deeply about that.
Tell me a little bit about this lane, Tunscombe Lane. A wonderful name. Well, and I see there's a gap in the bund to take the lane.
Well, we fought for that because the quarry owner wanted to actually put the bund right across. And because it's an ancient lane, we wanted to retain it. And it is said that the monks from Witham Friary Monastery used to bring their sheep through this lane for the summer grazing. It's precious. The hedges are ancient hedges, and it's an ancient way, and we'd like to retain it if we possibly can. So the fighting goes on.
That's it, that's good. Hold that, hold that. Good.
I've got nothing to laugh about. I'm angry about this quarry.
I'm out of the film now.
Lee Manders is another lady who has been deeply affected by the quarry industry.
Well, apart from the industrial blot on the landscape over there, it's actually quite an attractive scene. And it's got quite an interesting history, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. This is Waterlip Quarry, and when the last company moved out, the residents were actually fortunate enough to be able to club together and buy this piece of land. And unfortunately, where I live, we've got a similar situation, but we're unable to buy it to stop planning.
It's an extraordinary sight, isn't it? Because it's, you think of the activity that went on here, and actually nature has recolonised quite well. There's a lot of wildlife as well, isn't there? You'd like to see the same next door to you?
I would love to see the same. Well, we bought the cottage about a year ago, and it was an absolutely ideal position for me, the children. A wonderful, quiet area. And one day when I was walking the dog, there was a notice on the gate, and it just said planning for a quarry to reopen, which was absolutely devastating. We weren't aware that this was once, 22 years ago, a quarry.
It's quite small, really, isn't it, actually, and not very deep.
No, I don't think they can go down too deep because of the quality of the stone. But they're going to extend it north and east towards our house.
Well, I realise how close it is. In fact, I can see your house, I can see the chimneys. A bit frightening prospect, really.
Oh, definitely, and the noise. We just don't know how much noise that this is going to make.
It's on your doorstep. Some people will say, oh, well, this is not in my backyard. I mean, I've walked across Tor Quarry through the village of Downhead, where people are literally, the whole village is living on the edge of a quarry. I mean, what is the answer?
Don't give out any more planning permission to quarries. I think they've got enough area, enough space, and I think they're just getting too greedy.
I think they're blighting people's lives.
Yeah, and people aren't aware of it in this area. I've lived on the Mendips all my life. I didn't think I'd fall for something like this.
Come towards me. I'm trying to get this feel of you in this small quarry and your house. It's good. Stay there.
On top of East Mendip, there is a very distinctive landmark. This is Cranmore Tower, and it dominates the area for miles around. The history of Cranmore is well documented by author Mary de Vigiani, who is also a strong campaigner with the Council for the Protection of Rural England.
Cranmore Tower was a folly built by the Paget family of Cranmore Hall in the 1860s. The landowners all built them to look at their estates, really, and competed about the height of the things. This one's lasted because it was built in solid materials. Some of the others fell down or were demolished. They used to bring visitors up here to show them the wonders of the countryside, and particularly their estate, which was quite big. They ended up coming with parties into a dining room which was downstairs, and there was a small kitchen, and the butler and all the servants came and brought all the picnic stuff, full dinner party stuff, and they'd have a meal and sit around in the sun, and the gentlemen perhaps would go shooting. And just to admire their possessions, the view.
And I suppose in those days it must have been a magnificent view.
It would have been a wonderful view. You
And
could
no
see right
quarries.
across to Wiltshire without any stop, lots of woodland. I mean, all that area over there would have been wooded. I, in fact, can remember that quarry when it was very, very small, and didn't make much of a dent in the countryside. They came here, the yeomans, in the 60s. In the 70s, they got government grants to help them to put in the railway line from Whittam. And it became a railway-driven quarry, which of course meant that the extraction was much faster. If you want to fill up a railway train with stone, you have to dig an awful lot of stone to fill that railway train. And they've not looked back, really. They've quarried as much stone in these last few years as they ever quarried before. So it is a very, very fast escalating rate of extraction.
One of the things that I asked Angela Yeoman about Tor Quarry was that, of course, sometime in the future, it's all going to come to an end. And what do you do with this great big hole? Now, she said it would make the most wonderful lake, reservoir.
Possibly a reservoir, but not a wonderful leisure lake. You can't sail in these deep, steep-sided quarries. All the wind pressures and things are wrong for sailing, for example. It's very cold, and if you fall in, you can't swim in it. Below 10 meters, it's ice cold, and you get cramps, and you don't have to be there very long. As far as reservoirs go, the pure water out of the Mendip Hills aquifer is a much better type of water. It's pure and it's filtered and it's wonderful than anything that is gathered into a quarry. A quarry full of water would be full of pollutants, fairly murky and sterile. It wouldn't be very nice water. They could then purify it and put it through a process. What would be best for them is for them to be allowed to revert. I know it sounds very peculiar to say that these big quarries should be allowed to revert. They should be wooded and allow the springs and the water to do its own thing and left as they are. They wouldn't be safe, okay, but then Cheddar Gorge isn't particularly safe if you're bouncing about on the edge of the gorge. They would have to do protection like they do on the edge of Cheddar Gorge.
What do you think the future is? Why do we need all this limestone?
I don't think we do need all this limestone. We've cut back on the road programme. We should be recycling far more material. There's research into specifications of road materials, among other things, because they're far too high. You're putting pure limestone into the ground where they don't need to. They could use other materials. We've got much too technical. Everything has to be perfect.
I'm going to try and take your picture. We're fast losing the light here. Can you just turn your head a little bit into the sunlight? Now look back at me. That's great.
They should be cutting back and allow the countryside here to have a bit of peace.
There is a national need for limestone. We don't make the need, I suppose civilization does.
And all the time, they're taking away our children's inheritance.
Such a pity that it is designated to be quarried, and once gone, you can never, ever, ever put them back again.
For me, this walk has raised a dilemma. No one can deny that the nation needs some limestone. If the population increases, we'll need new houses, schools and hospitals. And even if we cancelled all road building, the ones that exist already would have to be repaired. But the environmental impact of all this quarrying is potentially devastating. And who can be confident that if we carry on quarrying right down to sea level, we won't upset the natural balance of the Mendip water supply? And who wants to see a future full of water parks and confined entertainment? These wild places in Britain are shrinking, and we need to put our thinking caps on now if we're going to safeguard them for the future. A busy main road through the centre of a village is a late 20th century curse, and the motorist will often speed through, unaware of its hidden delights. This is the village of Stone Easton, on the northeast flank of the Mendips. It grew up here because of a small valley of spring water, which also gave shelter from the cold winds sweeping across the hills. Originally a scattered settlement of 4 Saxon manors, the village expanded into one huge estate, culminating in this magnificent edifice, Stoneyston Park. It was once the manor and the centre of the estate, but it's now a luxury hotel and not the place to stay if you're on a meagre expense account. The lords of the manor of Stoneyston were the Hipsley family, and they can trace their origins in this part of Somerset way back to the 14th century. This walk is going to take us across the old Hipsley lands to Chewton Mendip, where another dynasty, the Waldegraves, or Walgraves as they prefer to be known, still rule. The last remaining Hipsley to live in Stoneyston is Kathleen, widow of John, who had inherited the estate on his father's death. Amongst her chickens and horses, she now lives above the stables that at one time belonged to the estate.
I was told once that when I married John Hipsley, I must remember I married Stoneyston village as well. Sometimes it's a bit of a bind, but they've looked after me well. To the park.
Kathleen gave me a tour of the grounds and described what it was like before Stoneyston became a hotel. They're wonderful, wonderful gardens, aren't they?
It is a good garden, yes.
You can see why it's called Park.
It was planted by Repton, actually.
That's
an
Humphrey
18th
Repton.
Century. Humphrey Repton, yes, the 18th century landscape gardener.
Nice glimpse of the house there.
Lovely
with the
glimpse,
trees.
isn't it? Very attractive. Here we are, going into the kitchen garden.
Oh, it's lovely, isn't it?
It
I
is
suppose
nice.
they chose this valley site because it was sheltered.
Yes, it was sheltered, but it is a frost pocket, which can be a disadvantage. All the glass houses were all the way along growing rather exotic things, peaches and melons and nectarines, etc. My mother-in-law was a very keen gardener, and she worked very, very hard. She concentrated for years on this pleasure gardens. They were known as her pleasure gardens.
So this was her baby in a way,
Yes,
bringing it
of
back.
course the stream has been opened up and cleaned since then. But it was very pretty. When my mother-in-law came here about 1904, I think, the gardens were pretty wild. And in fact, in the front of the house, the sheep came right up to the front door, which she didn't care for, and the cows. This house is a Jacobite house. They got quite a bit of money from Henry VIII. They backed the right side, the Reformation.
How does the village compare to the times of the estate and now?
They had a large number of farms. Several manors came in. It was like a medieval feudal village. Everything came from the top, employment, everything. Agricultural workers and workers on an estate, an awful lot was in kind. You probably had a free cottage, or you may have paid half a crown, 2 and 6, old money, for your rent, just as a token. And if you were on the farm, you had free milk. They killed a pig, you had some of that, lamb. So you were fairly well kept. There was a school started by my grandmother-in-law and another lady, Mrs. Nash. They wouldn't have a pub in the village, but an off-licence was allowed, and a working men's club, which she thought was sufficient. Well, now, of course, there's no shop. The school went, no off-licence, and it's sad.
When you stand in front of Stoneyston Park, you've got this magnificent view sweeping right up to Embra Church and the manor farm there.
My father-in-law, and probably his before him, nothing was allowed in front of the house to block the view. Not even a haystack was allowed to be put there. No trees planted. That's why you get that wide aspect. My father-in-law, who's always known as the commander, he died in 1956. John was left the estate, the house, everything, and of course the death duties had to be paid, and his siblings had to get their cut of the inheritance. So financially he was the worst off. And it was quite impossible to keep the house, which needed an awful lot doing to it, including the roof re-leading and things like that. And so the only way to pay the death duties was to sell the farms. So they were sold to the tenant farmers, many of whom had been there hundreds of years themselves.
Now tell me what happened to the house, because the estate was sold off, broken up.
It was terrible, because it was falling to pieces, literally, with the lead off the roof, you can imagine. And about 1957, it was bought for £7,000, purely for the timber in the terrace wood.
And you ended up in the stable.
And I ended up in the stables, and I can see myself ending up in a loose box soon, next to my horses.
Trying to come out.
Yes, it's
what
time.
What I'd love to do is photograph you here, because there's a beautiful stable. So, if you get in, can you get inside?
Yes. Yes.
I must ask you this. What does it feel like, having gone from
I'd like a little
what effectively was a dynasty to
just come up.
living above the stables?
Come a little bit nearer.
You must remember, you see, I came in at the slope of the dynasty.
Okay. It's just catching that moment when
Yes,
she
it is. That
keeps her head
marvellous
still.
moment. I put a hook on, but it spoils her.
Yeah, no, that's lovely. That's
I
lovely.
couldn't leave the village.
That's good.
It's
You're
become
rooted
part.
here.
I'm rooted in the village. I love the Mendips anyway.
That was good. When I first saw Lechmere Water written on the map, I presumed that it was just another limestone quarry, now flooded and redundant. But Edinburgh Pond, as it's known locally, has a very interesting history. Even in Saxon times, the farms in this area would have had to grow a certain amount of corn, and a grinding mill was an important part of the manor economy. All traces of a mill have long since vanished, but there are records to show that this water started life as a mill pond. By the 15th century, this pond was leased by the monks at Hinton Charterhouse, and they, having no need for a mill, turned it into a giant medieval fish pond. We know all about that because on the 20th of May, 1532, 6 local lads came down here, hell-bent on a day's poaching. Not only did they drag the water with their nets, but later on in the day, they broke open the dam and emptied the pond. I quote from the court proceedings. "These riotous persons, of their cruel and uncharitable minds, cut, digged, and cast down the dam of the said pool to the bottom, by reason whereof, as well all the water as the fish, both great fish and young fish, ran out of the same pool into the fields and ditches thereunto adjoining, whereby as well the same pool as all the said fish were utterly destroyed." Poaching carried severe penalties, but there's no record of the outcome. However, we do know the names of the poachers, and 2 of them were Hipsley boys. Ironic, really, because in 1570 it was the Hipsleys who purchased the pond. Over 400 years later, it's still in the family, a small reminder of what was once a fine estate. Stone Easton is now a manor without an estate, but across the hill at Chewton Mendip, the Waldegrave estate survives, almost intact. They run a famous cheese dairy, and in the grounds I came upon a mystery. At one time there was a large country house here called a priory, though historians say the name is a misnomer. But did a medieval priory exist? Bob Powell, who works in the dairy, has his own theories. So this was the main drive then, down to the front of the house?
That's right, yeah, and the main house would have stood sort of just here.
Just here?
And this would have been the front door.
You wouldn't believe it, would you, looking at it today? You know, I mean, with all this tree cover, would you?
It's hard to imagine actually a large house stood on this site. It was built about 1780, and then in the 1860s it was purchased by the Lady Frances Countess Watergrave, and it was much enlarged, and it carried on until the 1950s when it was finally demolished. Just after the last war, the building had been occupied by American and British servicemen, and it wanted a lot of money spent on it. It was in rather a bad way, and in those days money wasn't readily available to do these sort of buildings up. It was offered to various organisations. It was probably a farming college or a nursing home, this type of thing, but it was decided in the end, rather than just let it fall down, they would take it down and make use of the building materials.
So the same thing could have happened to Stoneaston?
It could have, yeah, it could have happened. I mean, there are a lot of large houses on the Mendips that did disappear at that time.
So this was the house in the, as it would have looked when it was built in the 1780s?
That's right. And then in the 1860s, it was greatly added to, and it turned out to look like this.
So you don't think that in the 1780s, when they built the original house, the original Chewton Priory, this wasn't just a bit of romantic, Gothic
I don't
architecture?
think so, no. I believe there was actually a monastic building on the site.
All the historians say that's untrue. There was never an actual priory here.
Well, I disagree with this, actually, because there is sort of written evidence of the actual monastic building that stood on this site being demolished in the time of Henry VIII. He decided he didn't like his priories, and down they came. There's actually a document that states that the priory at Chewton Mendip suffered the common lot, and it was demolished and stone was carried away and sold.
Now that's interesting, because on my walk from Stoneaston, I'd heard about this, and I thought, well, if a priory had been demolished, quite often bits of stone would be incorporated into other buildings within the area, but I haven't seen anything. I've looked and I haven't seen anything.
Well, on this side, actually, there are pieces of stone around which I believe came from this original building. If you actually look at the carving on the stone, it looks sort of quite medieval.
Can you show me that?
I can, certainly. I was alerted to this about 2 years ago when the builders were renovating the building, and one of them called me over to have a look, knowing that I was interested in local history. Asked me what I thought of it. If you look at all this sort of intricate carving and sort of a rose type pattern there, it sort of reminds me of sort of medieval type carving. If you think back to when the place was demolished, I doubt if they took stone very far away from the site. They'd probably used it locally to build all sorts of things. And I think this is of great interest.
It's odd, it's the only one, isn't it, really?
But then, looking at the other stone, it looks to me as though someone went to great trouble to chisel off this pattern.
Yes, you can see
or
dress
whether they
marks
actually
there,
used
you?
the stone, they reversed the pattern, and just an odd bit there escaped.
So you think turned round inside these walls,
That's right,
maybe
yeah,
more of it?
That's right, but if you look at sort of chisel marks on this, it could well have taken the pattern off.
So tell me about Lady Frances then.
Lady Frances married into the Watergrave family. She had 4 husbands. 2 of them were Watergraves. 3 of them predeceased her and left their fortunes to her outright. And she entertained on a very lavish scale. People would come in from Europe, the Comte and Comtesse of Paris, and have quite, social gatherings. People such as Edward Lear would be here to entertain them. And
they really put Chewton Mendip on the map.
It did, yeah. I mean, you hear stories about some of the villagers used to stay up all night watching the various celebrities arrive, It's, caused quite a stir in the village, I think.
It's hard to believe it's all gone, isn't it, really?
Yeah. I mean, today you have visitors here now, but it's for a totally different reason. They're coming now to visit the cheese dairy.
Just twist it round. Yeah, I like that. That's great. This is wonderful. That's brilliant.
A path from the dairy across the fields takes us to the village of Chewton Mendip, giving us a timeless view of the parish church in a handsome setting. Dedicated to St. Mary Magdalene, it boasts the tallest tower on Mendip, leaping to the heavens in bold yet graceful stages. It is said to have taken 100 years to build, and I imagine it emptied the parish purse on more than one occasion. Of course, towers were built for a reason. They were a way of showing off, each parish trying to better the other. And at the top was the crowning glory, the bells. One of the things that surprised me coming in here, I mean, it's such a huge tower, and I'd heard that it's got a wonderful peal of 8 bells, but where are the ropes? There's only 2 tiny ropes here, and that can't possibly do 8 bells.
No, the bell ropes, what we ring with, are up the tower.
But usually you'd find them down here.
Yeah, but it's such a tall tower, and you couldn't have the long reach between the bells and the ropes from where you ring. You need to be closer to them.
David, tell me about your father then.
He started ringing when he was 12, and I don't know when he took over the captaincy of the tower, but he rung the bells for 60 years. Right. This is the ringing chamber, where all the work's done.
Wonderful room. Could you possibly demonstrate one without waking the village?
I can pull one up, but they're all down at the moment. I should be out of puff by the time I got this one up. Because you've got to get the...
God.
I got to get him striking now.
I suppose you have to give up quite a bit of time to it. It's
Oh yes,
practice makes perfect.
Practice makes perfect. I don't do so much as I should do, that's the thing, you know. We haven't got a team of bell ringers in the village. We've got to have outsiders come in.
How many do you need for a team?
About 8 to ring.
One for each bell?
One for each bell, 8 bells, yeah.
There's only 2 of you.
There's only 2 of us left in the village now.
So is that it? Is that its pitch then now?
No, if you could...
It's still not up there yet?
No. I'll tell you in a minute. I should have had a lighter.
Don't die on me, will you?
I should have had a lighter one.
Do you think it's very much tied up with the church and as a churchgoer then, or do you think some people just do it for the fun of it and aren't?
No, well, they do it for the fun of it because they go around from tower to tower ringing pills, ringing all the different pills because it's like Dad, he had a whole list of towers, always kept a check of all the different towers that you rung at. It's a hobby really as well as everything else.
I don't know if this is possible. This one moment when your feet leave the ground.
If you were downstairs, hanging onto this rope, okay, and we saw you pull this gigantic pull, and then eventually you got this sort of little. It was sort of slipping through your hands, and then another gigantic pull. So what's happening?
Yeah, every time you pull it, see where the rope's going down through the floor there?
Yeah, off the wheel.
Yeah, that's the first pull, and then he swings back, and then every time you pull harder...
It's swinging more and more.
Yeah, it's more and more, until eventually that bell will come right up round here, and he'd be up vertical, and the stay, you know...
And you feel that?
Yeah, you feel it. Yeah, he clicks right into place there, yeah. Dad come up here in 1909 when they come up to Chewton. He was 8 years old then.
Farming?
Yes, farming, yeah. They come from a farm down at Bishop Sutton way under the lake and come up to Barrel Farm up in Chewton Mendip, up in the hill.
So this was a tenancy farm?
Yeah, tenancy farm, yes.
Of the
on the Watergrave, Watergrave farm.
And then you took over from your father then, did you?
No, I wasn't allowed to take over from my father.
Why was that?
Because I hadn't had any college education. The Watergrave estate wouldn't let me take the tenancy on.
Really?
They'd done all the practical, but...
But you bought some land?
Yes. We went to the auction. Dad gave the Watergrave estate a chance to buy it. And they said it was too dear. So Dad went down there the following day and bought the land. It's not quite enough to make a living on, but I keep some suckler cows there and run beef cattle on it.
walking around this village, I mean, it's a lovely village, but it's a bit of a shambles, isn't it? I mean, it really is run down.
There's a heap of cottages in the village what aren't lived in at the moment. Some from the Watergrave and some that's privately owned, but they don't do anything with them to, you know, to improve the village, I don't think, you know.
So do you think it's an estate in decline then?
Well, I think natural estates, yeah, is declining, yeah, because everything that comes free is always sold off eventually. I mean, say, when we were farming, Dad farmed, I suppose there was 15 or 16 farms around the village. I think it's only 3 working farms around the village now, apart from their own.
So how do you see the future in the village then?
Well, it's like, well, I got two children married, a son and daughter, and they both had to go away from the village because they couldn't afford any property in the village, and really it's a dying village. Our mother says this is always a shambles up here and I should tidy it up, but this is as far as it goes, so matches in with the village, I say. This is where it's done then.
Good. So, what do you call yourselves?
The Gorgons Carnival Club.
The Gorgons?
Gorgons, yeah.
And how long have you been a club then?
25 years, and I've been in it like 24 years.
And this year the design is to do with stars, so there's still a hell of a lot of work to do. Yet.
Oh yes, we got a lot to do, yes. We always seem to be in the same boat. We always seem to be the last minute rush, you know. But, I think that's what it's all about. Yes, that's right. That's what it's all about, I think.
So the Wells Carnival is the 22nd of November. So how many months before do you, well, start work on it and decide on your design?
Yeah, well, we start in January, and well, we do, and pick an ideal and start stripping down and everything. But we wait for the weather to get better to come up here and do too much. And we say we can go and work all through the summer, but everybody has summer holidays, and it gets postponed a bit. Plus our fundraising, what we do, and we got to keep our fundraising up together.
So I imagine it costs quite a lot to put this on.
Yes, you know, it costs. The hire a generator is going to cost about £1,000 just to hire a generator in. We aren't the biggest, a lot of the big ones from Bridgewater, not by a long way, but it's big for us.
This is the village of Priddy, high up on the West Mendip Plateau. And it boasts a huge village green, and on it, a rather unusual feature. There is a legend that as long as this old stack of sheep hurdles stays here on the green, Priddy can hold its annual sheep fair. It may be an old wives' tale, but believe it or not, 1997 saw the 650th anniversary. It is reputed that the fair moved up from Wells in 1348, escaping the ravages of the Black Death, and has simply stayed. Today's fair is bursting at the seams. It's now a horse fair, a fun fair, and a sell-you-anything fair. But sheep, and farmers like John Small, are still central to the event. The sheep fair takes place on the Wednesday closest to the 21st of August, and is the centrepiece of the Mendip year.
Grandfather was taking sheep into Priddy Fair.
And it's still an important part of your yearly round, then?
It's not for the number of sheep we actually sell there. It's a bit of a showcase for the sheep we got at home. I mean, it's a chance for people to actually see the sheep. You can't describe a sheep over telephone.
You're picking out 100 of your best, then, are you, to take down there?
Well, not necessarily 100 best, but 100 representative of what you got at home. It's no good just showing your best, otherwise they're disappointed when they come and look at them, aren't they?
Describe the day, then. I mean, what do you get up to?
It's a bit of an early start, because these sheep have got to be got ready, prepared, loaded, and in there by really 7:30. After that, it gets so jammed up and chaotic, you've got no chance of moving them.
At one time, Priddy may well have been just a sheep fair, but today it's the horses that draw the big crowds. On a green close by the church, the gypsies have set up camp, with the hope of selling their horses in and around the fair. There's a confusion of terms, isn't there? There's gypsy, tinker, traveller, and these days new age traveller. I mean, where do you fit in?
I'm a diddycoy, I'm a half-breed.
You're a diddycoy, so
yeah.
that's half gypsy, half
gorgy.
Gorgy?
Magenta gypsy, yeah.
Right.
I'm a half-bred.
Doesn't really matter to
No,
you.
it don't matter. I'm quite pleased to be what he is. But horse trader, really.
So for you, this is a passion, then?
This is a passion, yeah.
Horses are a passion in your life.
Tis a passion. Tis a living, or half a living, like. Do you know what I mean? I struggle along, I'm never going to make fortunes or nothing, but I'm just happy. You know, it's a quality of life. That's what I think, and tis a passion.
Mark, how long have you been coming to Priddy Fair, then?
All my life.
All your life?
Yeah, as long as I can remember, yeah.
And why do you come?
It's tradition, isn't it? It's like Christmas. You just come here, like, it's a thing that happens, like, you know, it's a date of the year that we knows, like birthdays and things like that. Things are important. It's a very important thing to come to.
And a big social gathering, really.
A very big social gathering, yeah. Might not see people for a year, like, at a time, like, you know.
Yeah.
And then some people might miss a year, and so you might not see them for 2 or 3 years, like, you know. And then they appears there again, like, you know, because they can't leave it alone.
So it's good fun.
Yeah.
Okay, just look this way, Mark. Come on, I know you're not shy.
It's not just the fair that has drawn me to Priddy. This is great walking country. For many people, Priddy is the heart of Mendip. It's high up on the limestone plateau and has a recorded history which goes back thousands of years. These barrows date from the Bronze Age, some 2,000 years before the birth of Christ. There's not just a wonderful view from up here, you are also struck with a sense of awe. Who can say what religion these people followed? All that is left are their monuments to the dead.
It's a fierce sun and a cloudless sky. They're not ideal conditions for taking photographs, and especially trying to interpret the Priddy barrows. But what I've done is I try to use this gate and the dry stone wall running up to the horizon there to give some sort of lead in for the eye. So it may work, it may not.
Apart from the stack of hurdles, Manor Farm is perhaps the most distinctive feature of Priddy Green. It's been in the Main family for 5 generations, and Robin Main is one of the organisers of the fair.
It's quite a romantic view when you sort of come round the corner and you see for the first time, and you see pretty green, and then the manor farm at the end there. So tell me a little bit about your family history.
Well, my great-grandfather arrived here about 150 years ago, bought the manor farm from a James Green, and so well, presumably he was lord of the manor then and had it built.
What do you farm here?
Mostly dairy cows, a few arable crops and potatoes.
And no sheep? You don't
No.
bother with sheep? You leave all that to John Small, do you?
That's quite right, yeah. Our fences aren't good enough for sheep, I'm afraid.
And tell me a little bit about the green, because this is quite unusual, isn't it, here up on Mendip, to have this huge village green.
It's used for all sorts of things during the year. The most important being pretty fair.
I gather you're a shareholder of the fair, so explain that to me.
At the beginning of the century, Pretty Fair almost died out through lack of funds to buy new sheep herding. So local people were asked to donate some money to keep the hurdles in good repair, and hence they're all issued with shares. And the shareholder's been running it ever since.
So you're running it, really, and so what you're doing is you're charging ground rents for people who come here, are you?
We are, yeah.
And then you put that funding back into the maintenance of the fair and the green, do you?
And a stack of hurdles and the thatching, hire of toilets.
So tell me a little bit about the jurisdiction, then, of this village green.
Before the 1965 Registration Act, it was all known as common land. But we were told that if it was registered as village green, that the parish would have more control on what went on it.
So some weren't very happy about it, is that right?
You could say that, yeah. People say that these days bits of it are being eroded.
And how are they being eroded?
With cars parking, mainly.
So, in law, the parish council now is the rightful owner?
That's what we think.
That's what you think?
Yeah, it is a bit of a controversy going on at the moment.
Are there as many sheep here as normal?
No, there wouldn't be so many here in common with the other fairs this year. Sheep numbers are down. There's plenty of times when I've seen a lot less sheep, but then having said that, there's plenty of times when I've seen more. I mean, Priddy as a sheep fair nearly died out back in the sort of the 20s and 30s, and you used to see hundreds and hundreds of working horses up here. Well, we see plenty of horses up here now, but I mean, they're not so much working horses. It's the relative fortunes, and it's a barometer of agricultural times, really.
It's better to have a nice horse, isn't it? Nice piebald horse.
The way we tend to sell is you sell the first pen and then give the option on the next two. But sometimes people just say, look, let them just run in and pen them as they are, and then there's no difference between any of the pens. Other times people like to have their best pen there, and I mean, they make a good price, and then the farmer says, well, I'll have the next two pens as well, and they all run together, and he gets a good price for 3 pens. But these are nice sheep, good sheep. Good, bold, strong ewes, you know, sensibly covered. You can look at a sheep and you say, well, how much flesh has he got on him? And until you actually handle him, you don't really know whether he's a fat one or a thin one. But with a ewe, they don't want to ever see too much condition on them. A fat ewe will be a hard breeder. I mean, and if she carries that fat all the way around through to lambing, she'll have difficulty in lambing. It's a nice steady flow coming in today, and the problem comes a bit later when there's more of a public about. But the police have been very sensible. They've blocked the cars from driving through the green this year, and that's going to make things a lot easier for one and all of us, I think.
Go on.
Go on.
Go on.
John, explain this to me then about Pretty Fair. You know, you're in this cycle, aren't you, of selling sheep. You're selling sheep, somebody else is going to buy them. So what are they looking for?
I buy young ewe lambs. I buy them in September. I keep them a year and sell them as young breeding ewes at Pretty Fair. So they're hopefully looking for young breeding ewes to replace the ones they're older ones they're getting rid of.
So you're not really finishing them for the meat market
No,
then?
no,
This
no,
is for
no.
this is for breeding.
No.
The church at Priddy stands high above the village, and although a simple structure, it has a certain charm. It was dedicated to St. Lawrence in 1352, and it's probably no coincidence that Priddy Fair used to be held on the 10th of August, St. Lawrence Day.
This is the most interesting architectural feature inside Priddy Church, and historians are divided as to its purpose. At first sight, it looks like a stone pulpit, and indeed, from up here, you have a grand view of your congregation. But some historians believe, in fact, that this was originally the staircase to give access to the rood loft. Now, we have in this church a Jacobean rood screen, but in fact a lot of rood screens disappeared in the Reformation. But I'm of the opinion that in fact at some time in its history it was used as a pulpit. And the reason that I believe that is this little bit of stonework behind me, because this is curved and acts rather like a sounding board so that my voice carries across the church.
Traditionally, Priddy Fair was a sheep fair, or everybody tells me it was a sheep fair.
That's how it was originated, yeah.
But you're seeing more and more horses these days, really, and traders, and less sheep. Is that just a sign of the times?
I think the media's got something to do with it. It's sort of broadcast nationally, so people come from much further afield. And with the motor car, it's much easier to get here, isn't it? So they come
It's
in.
not a case of them pushing the sheep fair out.
I can see that coming unless we do something about it.
I mean, I suppose for the travellers and the gypsies, that's traditionally for them, that's how they've always sold horses, isn't it? They've always sold horses, and that's unlikely to change. But there's quite a revolution in the sheep auction and the cattle auction these days, the cattle market, the sheep market, isn't there? I mean, you can actually, in some places now, you can actually sit down in your armchair and watch the thing live on television and bid from your armchair. You don't actually have to go to market anymore.
No, that's it. But I'm sure most farmers like to see what they're buying, so I can't see it taking off or pushing out the auctions completely.
Everybody knows there we are, right up on the very top of the Mendip. There we are at Charterhouse. There's 11 in the first pen. Well, we'll give you the option on the next 2 pens as well. 20 to get on, £20, £20 bid, £20 bid. 20.50, 20.50, 21 bid, 21 bid. 21 pound, 21 half.
It's now 11 o'clock, and time to auction the sheep. A tense moment for John Small.
4 bid, 24 bid, half, 4 half. 5 bid, 25 bid, half, 5 half. 6 bid, 26 bid, 26 bid. £26, sold it away then at 26.
And that's it. Midday, and John's day is effectively over.
Beaten by horsepower.
But for the horse trader, the fun has just begun.
There's all these different terms. Tell me about flashing.
If you've got a horse you think is a good horse, and you show it off, a lot of qualities of a horse is not just looks, it's movement. If you can see a horse move and really use itself, That's what's flashing. You can flash one down the road, flash one back up the road, and people can look at it and see it go up and down and see, cool, that's smart, that's a nice thing, like, you know. With this job, it's like fly fishing, I think. I ain't much of a fly fisherman, but it's just casting your fly and putting it in front of the trout, and hopefully he'll take it. I think we should have a piece of road where we could trot them up and down and show them off properly, like, you know, and that would really, here there isn't enough room.
No. I suppose the argument is that it is a sheep fair and not,
That's
a,
what they
not
say.
a horse fair.
Oh, that's a smaller couple.
Hello, hi. I'm not selling, if you don't think that's what I'm doing.
How can you sell my horses?
Well, that's thank God for that.
Of course, a long way from Tipperary.
It's hard to believe now, but Priddy was once an industrial village. Lead was mined in these parts from at least Roman times until the end of the 19th century, and the legacy of spoil has left us with a peculiar landscape. There's evidence of mining everywhere, but what makes the area so special are the massive wild flowers growing on land that can never be grazed.
This lovely little flower is called the bladder campion. You can see how it got its name. And here's an unusual sight. This little carpet of wild thyme is rather starved of moisture, and that's because underneath it there's an ant's nest. Look at that. Red ants. A little wild strawberry. Food for free. So this is the perfect habitat then, Jim, is it, for these dragonflies?
Yeah, this is the best thing about it is that it's not covered by, not surrounded by agricultural land, so there's no nitrates in the water.
They're magical things to watch, aren't they? Especially on a day like today.
They are. These sympatrums will spend about a year. In actual fact, the larger ones, the hawkers, will spend 2 years under the water. So if there's too many nitrates and the water gets full of algae or gets covered with duckweed on the top, then there's no light, no oxygen.
That's
and the
end
nymphs,
of them.
Yeah, the nymphs will all die.
So once they've hatched into a dragonfly then, a fully fledged dragonfly, how long are they going to live?
Probably, it varies from species to species, but normally anything from about 3 weeks to 2 months. The bigger ones lasting longer.
And of course, they'd mate,
yeah,
lay their eggs, and that's that.
It's a race against time. They, as soon as they come out, they emerge, and they'll spend a couple of days hardening up their skins, and they'll be out looking for a mate. The females will go away from the water and lay low, and then when they're ready to mate, they'll come towards the water. The males have already staked out a territory, and they will be grabbed straight away.
So Jim, when I look through all these rushes here, I mean, they're all on, I suppose some of them are on flower heads, some of them are just on the stems. I mean, they're not getting any sustenance from the flower head itself.
No, they're perching spots. A lot of dragonflies are territorial, and they'll fly off, actually try to feed, and then come back to their own perch. Yeah, I think these are immature black darters. You see that one over there? It's gone much darker.
Oh, I see it.
A few
This
days
one
older.
here.
Yeah.
See, these are much more yellow on the back, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because they're not in, they're not ready to breed yet. They're not as territorial.
I wonder how they got their name, dragonfly.
I think it's, well, they're quite vicious as far as other insects are concerned. So they're a bit dragonish.
Well done.
Oh, look at this. Have you seen this, Chris?
What's you found there?
It's a really huge spider.
Good Lord, look at the size of it. The body's lovely. It's got
Yeah.
a sort of beige colour with white spots on it.
I turn my back for a minute and look what happens. The film crew are shouting for help. The crane we have hired for the day is stuck in the air, and after fruitless attempts to gain a descent, the Somerset Fire Brigade comes to the rescue. At least the crowd are well entertained. It's now late afternoon, and in the pub car park, the horse trading is coming to a head. A few pints of ale have oiled the cogs. The air is tense, and hands are drawn. Now tell me about horse trading, because I've witnessed that before, and it's always seemed a bit of a mystery to me. There seems to me a lot of slapping of hands and a lot of scowling going on, and then an awful lot of standing around doing nothing and just sort of eyeing each other.
I suppose the scowling is because the man asks you too much, you think, like, and you don't want to give that much, like, you're trying to depress him or something or another. But no, it's like the striking of the hammer. When the auctioneer drops his hammer, like, you know, it's this final thing, like, eventually, like, and when that final slap comes, you know that a deal's been struck, like, you know, and it's
but it can take a long
It's
time.
legally binding. The slap of the hands is legally binding. Yes, it is. Yeah.
We come here, and I think we've played a big part in that in keeping this going. Because there's a lot of little fairs like this around. It was around here. It's died out. Where we never went. But where it all knits together, doesn't it? You've got the sheep, you get the stalls, you get the fair.
Over the years, I suppose fairs have changed, have had to change.
Of course they've changed. They've had to go with the time, they've had to go with speed. So everybody wants speed.
Speed.
Except for people who likes to ride on dodging tracks. And they've been about for a long time. And they're still as popular as ever. Everybody's going in for these white knuckle rides, as they call it.
And you've been coming here, you said, for 40 odd years.
Yeah.
So how have things changed for you at Pretty Fair? And what do you think of Pretty Fair?
Well, I wouldn't be coming that long if I didn't think a lot of it. I'm sort of semi-retired now, else I wouldn't be here. I mean, there's a lot of fairs I don't go to that I used to go to. I just like to come here. It's just one of them places I like to come. And you don't stay too long, it's short and you're away again. So you don't get fed up with it. I think it's wonderful.
When we search the landscape for clues about our past, we're often imagining a people who lived a very long time ago. But in this programme, I'm making a journey to show you evidence of a period in history that is only 2 or 3 generations old. This is the story of Mendip at war. I'm in the company of Don Brown, a landscape detective and a voluntary warden on the hills. We are heading for the island of Steepholm, still part of Mendip, but lying in the Bristol Channel. When war broke out in 1939, the threat of a German invasion by sea was taken very seriously, and the island was well placed for defence.
This was the base of a Nissen hut. When the troops came in, they had to live somewhere. They opened up the Victorian barracks, and of course the officers lived in that, and they put the NAFI in that, and the men initially lived in tents, but soon they put up these Nissen huts, and although the corrugated iron has gone, the concrete pads are still there. The people who did all the work initially were Indians, and they came complete with mules. Among the things they carried were tracks for a railway, and once they'd gone, there was this narrow gauge track. When I say narrow, 1 foot 11.5 inch gauge. The track's very steep, and so it's made into 3, if you like, big hairpins, or 3 big Zs. And on each of the angles there was a winch. And the winch dragged the trucks up the first leg of the 1 foot 11.5 inch railway, stopped, tied up to the next winch, up the next leg, and up the third to the top. And then on the very top there was a circuit of track and a little diesel truck which could pull them round, or they sometimes used mules. So the island had its own railway system. It really was a remarkable enterprise.
After a cup of tea in the officers' mess, we followed the route of the old railway to explore the rest of the island. How important was Steepholm to coastal defence?
You're high up over the water, you look out, there's the Bristol Channel all the way around you. Anything coming along the channel, you see it. If it's ships, you see it. If there are aircraft above, you see the aircraft. You see the weather coming. You can tell what the weather's going to be in the next few minutes. The Romans had a signal station here. The Vikings came here to raid the mainland. The Victorians built their defences here against the French in case they invaded.
That's it, just look up like that, because it's not a great shot, but it does give a sense of scale.
We're looking at a Victorian gun site right in front of us. They rather charmingly called it Garden Battery, and they had their guns covering the waters to the mainland. When the engineers came here in the Second World War and built their defences, they put them on top of that and less charmingly just called it Steepholm South. But they both covered the water, and they covered the stretch from here across to Bryn Down.
And what were they expecting to come up the channel?
The real enemy in these waters, they were ships. There were raiders, seaborne raiders against our convoys, because the Channel and the Severn carried a large number of ships coming into Bristol, Avonmouth and to the Welsh ports. The defences on this island, therefore, were horizontally aimed. They were looking out over the water. They were not against air attack, they were against the boats. And some of the defences here are actually right down at sea level for that very reason. Searchlights to cover the water at night, and the guns which could depress to fire at anything they spotted on the water.
On our return to the mainland, Don showed me yet another fort on the tip of Bryn Down. It too was built in Victorian times and was brought into use again at the outbreak of the Second World War. And there was a drawbridge then originally here?
Drawbridge, that's right. This is a modern addition to it. And the main buildings were accommodation, offices.
And what on earth is this? It looked like an upturned cannon.
Yes, exactly what it is. That's a cannon barrel that's sunk vertically, and that provides the mounting for the trunnions for a later cannon that sits on top of it, swivels round, covering over the stonework that's here. The rings held the cannon against recoil, and then you've got the rail on which the cannon completed its arc.
And they got quite a good view then over the...
Right across the bay, right across the
Bristol
Bristol Channel. You've now got the concrete, rather brutal concrete of the Second World War defences.
Not quite as attractive, are they?
Not quite, no, but you still see the small loopholes in it facing inwards in case they're needed. At the entrance here, you've got the two spots where the duty crew would live. There's a stove in there, and I suppose a few bunks at the time. And then through to the operational area. Iron doors on the hatches there, where they keep the ammunition they needed immediately. And now you can see the mounting for the gun.
Incredible.
Yes, the gun was brought from the First World War from a warship. It was a 6-inch naval gun. That's the mounting for it. Combat was at long range. And so the naval guns mounted here and on Steep Holm and on the Welsh side would effectively cover the entire channel. No ship could get up here without being in range of one or other of these guns. It was called the Severn Line, and it extended up as far as Avonmouth and Portishead. The lookout for this particular gun was on the very tip down here. At night, imagine it at night, you come down here, you're a soldier, you're not very keen anyway, and you've got to pick your way over this rough rock, there's no path, you've got this drop down here, and that's your final lookout. There was a steel shuttering round it, but you would sit there on duty, signalling your message back up a telephone wire to the guy sitting in the Nissen hut with the stove going and in the warmth and comfort.
Walking east and high on the hills above the village of Westbury sub Mendip, I find another relic from the Second World War. Now a tangle of concrete and steel, this was once a lookout post for the Royal Observer Corps, who would signal defences in Bristol of approaching enemy aircraft. On a clear day such as this, the view is magnificent, though often the hill fog would render this site useless.
Another one.
Almost everyone knows of the Home Guard. It was set up to defend the country from a German land invasion. Farmers John Seeley and Francis Stott were two of its members here on Mendip. In a wood near Green Ore, they took me to a secret hideaway and told me of their involvement in an equally secret organisation, the Auxiliary Army Units. The bunker was built for their unit by the regular army, and was so well camouflaged, I would certainly never have found it.
That's the entrance.
That's it.
It must have been very different at the time that you were using this bunker.
Oh yes, all this was all wood here. Trees are all gone. It's all all been cleared since we were here. The entrance into this bunker was by the side of a big tree, all overgrown on the top. We used to lift that up and clamber down in and get into the shelter underneath.
So you had a trapdoor, did you?
Yeah, but it was all camouflaged over. No, you couldn't find it. Not if you didn't know exactly where it was to.
So what do you reckon, Francis? Do you reckon we can actually get in there?
I reckon we can with great difficulty. Ooh.
Is this the original size?
This is it?
Yes, this is it, yes.
So John, what was the Auxiliary Army Unit?
They were formed to be a resistance movement to work behind the enemy lines when the Germans invaded this country. And we were trained in the use of explosives, and our job was really for sabotage.
Both of us were in the local Home Guard for about 12 months before we were asked if we would join this auxiliary units, which we didn't know anything at all about. So we did join, and then we had to sign the Official Secrets Act. None of our families knew anything about what we were doing, and all through the war they didn't even know what we were doing.
And we were never very popular with the local Home Guard. I got the impression they didn't like us very much after, because we left their unit down in...
Yeah, but we were equipped a lot better than they were, weren't we?
We had better equipment. They didn't have such good equipment by a long way.
What was the difference?
Well, we had Thompson submachine guns and revolvers.
Revolvers, fighting knives, knuckle dusters, rubber boots, commando boots, overalls.
And they couldn't make out what we were up to, I don't think.
They knew that we were doing something different, but they hadn't got a clue of actually what we were doing.
Of course, our parents didn't know. They didn't know I was in it. They didn't know. My parents didn't know I was in the Auxiliary Army Unit.
You were sworn to secrecy.
No. Yeah.
Well, I have to say, this secret bunker, you couldn't really swing a cat in here, could you? So how many of you were there?
Well, there were six or eight of us when we were all together.
About 8 mostly in these cells. the trapdoor coming down, the shaft coming down into it was over there, and the trapdoor was on the top. We came down in here, and this is where we kept our explosives and booby traps and all the rest of it, all the other equipment.
Oh, we used to go out in the old quarry at Dorset, which was the ex-Great Western Railway quarry, where we used to use all this explosive. We had blasting gelignite and plastic explosive, which was a very safe explosive. You could do anything with that. But the blasting gelignite, if you undid that, and you get the most terrible headache you ever had in your life. We could blow the tracks off a tank, or cut a railway line in half, or a tree, or anything else like that with explosives. Revolver practice, unarmed combat practice, you name it, we used to do it.
Yeah.
So you could both
Yeah,
take me out
so
with
we were really,
your bare hands.
yeah, we were really trained in sabotage.
Cut your head off too.
Cut my head off, right.
We had Garrison wires,
yeah.
we had. But we had a pull switch. You had that anchored onto wherever it was. You had that, this trip wire.
Across the road or anything.
Across the road or wherever it may be.
I see, and when somebody actually
found this wire,
actually pulled.
right, there was a detonator in the end here, and you had exploding fuse to wherever your explosive was, and then, well, that set the whole thing off.
So all quite lethal, really.
It wasn't as, yeah. But I can tell you what, the steel sheeting that they made this with, those elephant shoulders, there was some damn good stuff in those days. It stood 50 years of it, look.
Although we often laugh about the Home Guard, they would certainly have proved a godsend had there been a land invasion. But how would the Home Guard have held up the enemy? The clues are tucked away above the village of Dinder. Don Brown took me to see one of their more well-preserved fortifications, the pillbox. So we pinched the idea of the pillbox then from the Germans.
That's right. And they discovered on the Western Front that just a few men with a machine gun could occupy a pillbox and hold up scores, sometimes hundreds of our men for quite long periods of time. Thus it suited our needs and the needs of the Home Guard. It was quick, it was cheap to build, and just a few men could operate inside it. We built a line of them, about 100 of them, all the way from the sea, right the way across Somerset, east-west, on the south side of the Mendips. Now, it's a good pillbox for us because it's actually falling to pieces. And so we can see the structure. Now, the whole line was developed by the Royal Engineers, a local man who lived in Wells. He had his office above the Beckington Cafe in the Market Square, still there. And he had gangs of labourers, Irishmen, many of them, in from the Republic to work. And they came in, they built their brick shuttering on the outside, they poured in the concrete, and lo and behold, within hours, you've got a complete pillbox.
I've got to say this, Don, that red brick in a green countryside, that's quite conspicuous, really.
Yes, true. They were in folds of the ground, and there was also natural foliage, but if we're lucky, we'll still see some of the structures. Here they are, an eyelet. Eyelets were around the whole pillbox, and we've still got the wire on it, and these were stretched across on the whole structure, and on that would be either camouflage netting or the local foliage, whatever was needed. And then you could change this to suit the time of year. So I think they'd merged pretty well. Any shot that did get inside, yeah, the man there might be unfortunate. Behind him, there was a central pillar with angles in it, so that any shots would strike that, and that would break up ricochets to avoid damage to the other people inside.
Why here, along the foot of Mendip?
Certainly on the German plans, there was the option of landing around Lyme Regis. You've got quite a reasonable landing space, and then a drive northwards, straight up through Dorset, Somerset, easy country. You could reach Bristol, deep water ports, and then hook round the defences of London. It was a pretty good strategic concept. And to stop them on that line, the Mendips would, with the Somerset levels below them, would seem to be the best place to hold them up.
There are clues to the implements of war scattered all over the Mendips. These piles of stones were cleared from the ground when the Women's Land Army ploughed up the pasture in order to grow more food. So how did one become a land army girl?
I'd done 8 years at Clark on clerical work, And so if I was to have a change, I thought I'd plump for something like land work rather than go with the other forces where I'd probably get more clerical work.
What about you, Daisy?
10 years in Willses. Then the foreman come up and said, Daisy and all the other girls report to Nelson Street for the Land Army.
This is the farm where Dot and Daisy worked during the war. Tynings was taken over by the War Agricultural Committee, and each day Dot and Daisy cycled over from their billet here in the village of Priddy.
Well, it was a single-storey wooden building on 2 levels. And we had basic wooden bunks, 2-tier ones, and good flock mattresses, and a hot water system that was non-existent, so we used rainwater.
So the height of luxury then, really?
Oh, definitely, yeah. But it was warm and dry, reasonably.
What was it like in the winter?
We didn't stay there long enough to find out. We didn't.
So the early 1940s, and I assume that tractors were coming in then. So did you get to drive a tractor?
Yes, we were taken on as tractor drivers. And we learnt on the old Fordson, the simplest kind there was. And I learnt when we were coming up at Cheddar Gorge one day when they were hauling water. And the girl was with me, allowed me to stop and start the tractor and drive for about 2 miles. And that was my training for driving a tractor.
And so what did you have to do?
Hoeing, harvesting, haymaking. Ploughing, disking. Come on, Dot, and the
Feeding
rest.
the sheep.
Everything.
Ducking the sheep. That
Yeah.
in the
Oh
correct
yes,
term.
dip it, and getting thrown into the dip myself in the end, and that's the truth.
So suddenly you'd come from the town effectively into the middle of nowhere. So what did you do for entertainment?
Nothing. Well, we didn't have a lot of
time.
time really, not
We were
for
working till late.
Till late, because it was summertime. There was only the 2 pubs. Look, and that's also we had.
But you must have gone to local dances.
We couldn't dance with anybody. The fellows would sit round, and the mothers would be there always to see who they were going to dance with.
Do you miss those days?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we both had our own families and all the other paraphernalia of life, but it was good fun in the Land Army, although you shouldn't say that about wartime, but we did enjoy it. Hard work, but it was fun.
Heads up a little bit. That's lovely. Now look at me now.
Evidence of life during World War II is all around us. This striking monument of the Roman fable of Romulus and Remus stands on the side of the road between Wells and Chewton Mendip. It was carved by an Italian prisoner of war. Although not all the evidence is so beautiful, the Mendip landscape is full of relics that help us remember this nation's struggle for freedom. These sites are just as important as the relics of prehistory, and no doubt one day they will take their place in the story of Britain. Perhaps the most poignant reminder of this period are the graves of those who lost their lives in the war. These memorials are in the grounds of Downside Abbey in East Mendip and tell of a distressing experience of children caught up with the consequences of war. Dom Philip Jebb was a pupil at the school and in May 1943 was witness to a terrible tragedy.
I was playing a game of cricket, but my side was batting, and so I wasn't involved in that much. And so there was the first 11, the big boys, the 18-year-olds, were playing cricket here against an army team from Lark Hill. They were gunners. I was sitting on the bonnet of a car just about here with another boy, a contemporary of mine. We were just chatting away. And then we got off the car because I wanted to find out what the score was in my match. And I'd walked, I suppose, about 2 or 3 yards. I'd got to about here. There were these 2 aeroplanes. They were Hurricanes. The one in front was training the one behind. But when I got here, they came over there very, very low indeed. And the first one swept over, and I was a small boy. I was only this high. So what, I suppose I was about 15 feet above the lower field. And it was below me. I could see over the top of this plane. And then the second plane, which had the trainee in it, who was a New Zealander, probably hit one of the trees. There's an argument about that. They were lower, of course, in those days. And anyway, he then came down very, very low, and he cut off the head of one of my contemporaries on that cricket pitch there, mangled up the legs of a second boy, 10-year-old, and then he hit the ground and was coming straight at me. And then it skidded across the road and caught fire, and then crashed down the bank into all these boys. And they caught fire, and others were killed straight off instantly on the back of their heads. And then the engine, which of course was much heavier than the rest of the aeroplane, left the aeroplane, which was slowed up by the friction on the ground, and smashed into the wall there, where we've now put this memorial stone, because that was just a hole there, and the engine went straight through, because it's a very thin bit of stone there.
What happened to the pilot?
I can still see his white parachute beginning to billow out from the plane. But of course it was much too late. I mean, there was no chance. There was no ejection seat. You had to open the window and climb out of those planes, those fighter planes in the 1940s. And so he died here. Though I wasn't aware of that. I was aware of noise and fire, people running around on fire, and an awful lot of banging, because when it got to the bottom of the bank, the ammunition in the wings started exploding. When the guns weren't working, it was just in the fire, because there was a great mass of flame and smoke there. And I just stood there absolutely stock still. I couldn't move. I wasn't particularly frightened. I was just shocked.
Shocked.
And then an older boy, a prefect, an 18-year-old, came up and said, "Get away, go on, push off." And I then ran over to the woods there, where we were collected up, the smaller boys, and then we were led down to the school.
What is extraordinary for me as a photographer is that this dreadful event was captured by one of the pupils on his small box camera. The photograph has only recently come to light, a most remarkable testimony to the tragedy.
At the time of the crash, I was sitting just about where the plume of smoke arises on the top of the bank overlooking the cricket pitch. I remember turning to look at the planes and seeing the second one strike the treetops at the edge of the field. Sensing that it was about to crash near the bank, I covered the 20 yards to the spot from where I took the photo quite rapidly. I had a box camera in my hands and took the photo about a minute later. When the film was developed, I decided at the time that in view of the body in the foreground, it would be somewhat tasteless to show it around. However, after all these years, I feel that a copy should at least be kept in the school's archives.